guys, it's Christine from Monk and Milo. On today's video, I'm going to be going over watering. Now this is a big topic, so I'll try to cover as much as I possibly can, cover all the basics and the essentials. If you're a new plant parent, you've probably heard the warning not to overwater your plants. So what does it even mean to maybe overwater or underwater your plants? When I think of overwatering, I kind of think of it in two ways. That you could possibly overwater based on frequency or volume. So let's take this pink syngonium for example. Let's say I water it today because it's dry, and then let's say 4 days later I don't really check the soil, and then I just decide to water it again, and then 4 days later, because that's my schedule, I water it again. But maybe the soil wasn't even dry yet and it was still moist. I would call that overwatering based on frequency. The other way you could possibly overwater, I would say, is by volume. So that would be done in maybe pots without a drainage hole. So for this one, let's say I decide to water it and give it as much water as this pot could hold. That is too much water, and the soil is going to stay moist for too long and then possibly cause root rot. So in that sense, I'm overwatering by just giving it too much volume of water. And in the same kind of vein, what does it mean to underwater? So again, that could be by frequency, or if I water it just by giving it a little sprinkle, that would be underwatering it by volume. As far as knowing when you should be watering your plants, there are so many variables you need to take into account. First of all, what does your plant want? Does it want to be consistently moist like the calatheas? Does it want to dry out completely between waterings like your ZZ and snake plants? Or is it like most common plants where you can wait until the top inch or two is dry? Another consideration is the type of pot you have it in. So if it's a plastic pot, you probably are going to be watering less, versus a terracotta pot, you'll be watering more often just because the material is porous and the water will be evaporating as well. One thing to think about is how much light your plant is getting. So the same plant, if it's right up against a window, it's going to be using up the water more quickly, therefore you'll be watering more often, versus if you put this plant 10 feet away from the window, you'll be watering less often. Also think about the temperature, about the humidity, about the air circulation in your place. Those are all factors to kind of think about. Also, the size of the pot. So if your plant is in a 4-inch pot versus a 12-inch pot, it makes sense that you'd be watering your 4-inch pot a little bit more often than a 12-inch pot. How I like to tell if I need to water the plant is actually physically using my finger to touch the top inch or two of soil. An added benefit of doing this is that you're actually aerating the soil as well. So especially in plants that like to dry out between waterings, their soil can become hardened and compacted over time. So by actually using your finger and coming in here, you're helping to break up the soil, to aerate it, and that's what actually happens in real life. There's worms, there's bacteria, there's other microorganisms in the soil that are kind of working through the soil and helping to break it up. The concern with compacted soil is that if you're watering, it may actually just go on the surface and then down the side, so that it's not really getting to any of the roots, or not maybe all of the roots evenly. I know that some people use moisture meters to tell whether they need to water. You do need to be just a little bit cautious with those, because they don't actually measure moisture, they measure conductivity. So in soil that's maybe been heavily fertilized, it will actually probably give you a higher reading, meaning that it has moisture, whereas maybe it's really dry. And then also it depends on where you're sticking the moisture meter in different parts of the plant. So again, whatever works for you, whatever you're comfortable with, but I like the technique of just using my finger because then I can feel it. Okay, so now I'm going to be going over some examples of different types of plants and their needs. So we'll start from the highest maintenance, which no surprise is the calathea. Calatheas need to be kept evenly moist, and that's kind of a tricky phrase. Like, what does that mean? The analogy that I like to think of is like a sponge. So if you get a sponge wet and then you squeeze it, I would say that's evenly moist. But if you wet the sponge and then you just let it be, I would say that is too wet for these types of plants, and that would be more waterlogged. So I'll show you guys a little bit of technique of how to water as well. So this calathea does need to be watered. It's a little bit dry at the top. The technique I like to use, I'll give it a little bit of water just to wet the top, and then I'm just gonna wait a little bit for it to settle. And then I'm just gonna go through and give it a very thorough watering. And basically until I see water draining out of the bottom, out of the drainage holes. And for your moisture loving plants, I would say you could even go a second time through and just make sure all the roots get enough water. Essentially, I would let this sit for maybe 5-10 minutes, and then I would put it back into its decorative pot. So in the second category of plants are probably the most common. This is a pink syngonium. So these ones, you can allow the soil to dry out to about 1 to 2 inches or so. So this one also needs good watering. So I'll go ahead and use my watering can. Again, I'll kind of water the top soil and wait a little bit. And then I'm just gonna go in again, give it a very thorough watering until I see the water drain out the holes at the bottom. And then your third class of plants, I would say, are like the ZZ plants, snake plants, succulents, cacti, the ones that like to dry out completely between waterings. ZZ and snake plants are great because they really do just thrive on benign neglect. So for these, I kind of just check on it like every 3 to 4 weeks or so. If the soil's really dry, then I just give it a really good watering. And then I'll check on it again in about 3 to 4 weeks. Lastly, there are plants that you've planted into a pot without a drainage hole. So for these, my tip would be to water and eyeball about 1/3 the volume of the pot. So I'm probably just gonna give it about this much water. I actually don't use gravel or charcoal at the bottom. I've heard of some studies that have shown that it actually has the opposite effect, where the soil actually retains more water. If you do use rocks at the bottom of your pots, one great tip that I learned, you can actually take like a metal straw and just stick it through the edge of the soil here, and then take a syringe or a pipette to draw out the water that's settled at the bottom. So that's a great tip to use. I know there's a lot of controversy whether to use rocks or not at the bottom of these pots, and honestly, just do whatever you feel comfortable with. If it's working for you, then continue to do that. Whatever gives you peace of mind. There's one other category I wanted to talk about. So those are those plants that maybe you have a difficult time getting to the soil. So that could be maybe like your string of pearls, just because it's over the soil. Another trick to know when to water, besides touching the soil, is to actually feel the weight of the pot. So you'll kind of like gain a sense of that. So this is like the weight when it's dehydrated, when it needs water, and then this is the weight when it's fully saturated with water. So you'll kind of learn that over time. So that's all the tips that I have for now. If you guys have any other questions or comments, please leave them below, and I'll see you guys next time.